So, as a parent of students in the Valpo Public Schools, this week we received a couple really interesting messages from the administration. Earlier this week, the first message said, just want you to know that there has been posted somewhere a threat of a shooting at the high school this week, but we want you to know we're taking it seriously, and we're going to have extra security there, so don't worry about it. A little bit later on in the week, we got the second follow-up message, which said, so about that shooting thing, just so you know, we've found who it was, and we've talked to him, and we've verified that we're almost certain it's really nothing, and we've taken care of it, so don't worry, and we'll have the extra security there just in case. So don't worry. That was Friday. It was scheduled to be this past Friday at that building right over there, across the street. Interesting, huh? And it's an interesting moment as a parent to get a note like that and to say, these things that we hear about and that we read about and that are going on and we watch and hear in our newspaper and on the TV and stuff like that, that stuff out there, well, that came awfully close, didn't it? And those things out there became a little uncomfortably personal, and that can happen to us, right? One of the ways that we get through the world these days with our 24-hour news cycle and all of that is we leave those things that are out there, and that's where they're supposed to stay. So we watch this coverage of the hurricane, Florence, that's making landfall now, and we watch those clips with that sort of sick fascination, but that's way over there. Now, we may have family there, and so it certainly is coming personal for us, but it doesn't look likely that it's going to come across the Great Lakes and down Lake Michigan to land on us here, so we can leave it over there. Or that super typhoon. I didn't know there were super typhoons that's gone through the Philippines and now is heading for Hong Kong, but that's out there. And so one of the ways that we get through our news cycles is by leaving those things that are out there. And when they come close, personal, they come to our town, when they come into my own life, that can be a little uncomfortable, right? Maybe you feel that sometimes too. So that was the sort of frame of mind that I was in this week as I started encountering this reading from Mark. This reading which has Peter's great confession of faith. You are the Messiah. And now you're calling me Satan, right? It's this super high and then a crash and burn that happens so fast. And I found that as I was encountering this, it was another moment when something out there was getting a little too close to home. And it was for me that phrase that Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. Take up your cross and follow me. Now, the cross, crucifixion, being put to death as a public spectacle so that you are humiliated and to keep people in their place as a power dynamic, that kind of thing is easy to say, well, that was back with the Romans, right? That was a couple thousand years ago. We don't have Romans around in power in the same ways, and so we can leave that over there. So it can be that, and my cross is going to be something I can manage. But then I started to remember, think about what crucifixion is, right? It's a public execution that is intended to keep people in their place. In our country, we called that lynching. And in truth, here in Indiana, our last lynching was only 85 or so years ago. The last recorded lynching in our country was in 1985. 1985. No, it was 1981, I'm sorry. That's within my lifetime. And it turns out there was actually somebody crucified last month in Saudi Arabia. That's still a thing. Did you know that? It's still on some law books that the punishment for a particular crime can be crucifixion. Now, in this case, he was not crucified because of following Jesus. He was a murderer and an attempted rapist and a thief and all of this stuff. And the punishment for that is to be killed and then your body publicly crucified. But this was last month. This is a thing. And I'm not so sure I like the idea of Jesus being lumped in with a murderer and attempted rapist anyway. How do you feel about that? So it was this thing that came a little too close to home for me. It was a little uncomfortable to hear Jesus say, "Take up your cross and follow me." Now, I freely admit that I give the disciple Peter a hard time. He's my favorite because I see in him so much of myself, like opening your mouth to switch feet primarily. He's the impetuous one. He's the one who sort of dives in, sometimes literally, dives into the lake to get to Jesus. He's the one who, his faith is right out there on his sleeve. And so I both see myself in him, and I kind of want to be like him sometimes too. And I give him a hard time for that, and maybe that's not quite fair for me. Because when Peter here makes his great confession, "You are the Messiah." When Jesus says, yes, that's what everybody else is saying, but how about you all? Who do you all say that I am? When Peter says, "You are the Messiah," he's making a stunning claim. And he's a very specific one too, because what Peter is saying, Jesus has not looked like this at all. When Peter, as a first century Israeli Jew, says, "You are the Messiah," what he means is revolution, politics. This is as political a claim as anything we can imagine. It means, Jesus, we expect you to bring in the army, raise the army. We're ready to go. And let's kick out these bums who are occupying our land. Let's set things up the way they are supposed to be and the way that God meant for Israel to be. Let's get the right government and make everything right. And we're ready to go. We'll be your lieutenants. We expect something great from you, Jesus. But Jesus hasn't looked anything like this. So Peter is expressing a hope, a desperate hope that says that we think you have this in you. And Jesus doesn't say no. Did you notice that? It's the most amazing moment. Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, Peter." He never says, no. He redefines it and says, "Don't tell anybody." And when Jesus then starts saying, yes, and here's what that's going to look like. It's going to mean being betrayed, arrested, beaten, hung on a cross, dying, and then coming back to life again. Peter's response is actually pretty understandable, isn't it? Because Jesus is talking nonsense. And Peter pulls him aside and says, "No, Jesus, if you didn't say no, this is what this has to look like." And it started to occur to me this week that maybe we shouldn't give Peter such a hard time because we're not that different, really. As we follow Jesus in our world today, we are in the midst and we are in a culture that is so much about everything pointed to me. And if everything points to me, then surely everything's supposed to be just right and best for me. So I'll make all my decisions that way. And when we pray, then it can be, God, just make things the way they are just a little better. And God, grant me exactly the things that I need. Instead of saying, God, your vision seems to be different. Help me see the world that way. That upside down vision that your kingdom is going to bring. And it shapes who we are. It shapes how we see the world. And whether we're part of God transforming the world in love as followers of Jesus. So we're not that different, are we? We have a way we expect God to work. And when God doesn't, that's hard. But as people who follow Jesus after Easter, we have a wisdom and a way of knowing that Peter didn't get to have. Because we know that Jesus is just telling the truth. From this moment, from Peter making his political claim and Jesus explaining what that really means, every single step from that moment on is heading to a particular destination. Every step from this moment on in Mark is going to Jerusalem. Right into the halls of power there, to where he will be betrayed and arrested and tried on a false trial. He'll be beaten and dragged, brought out to the cross. He will die there friendless, abandoned, in agony. He will be buried, and he will rise again. Everything Jesus says is true. And as people who know the rest of that story, that allows us to know something that Peter couldn't yet. And that is that it is in the cross when the power of the universe becomes a little too close for comfort. It becomes awfully personal on that cross. It is personal because that should have been our spot. It is us that put Jesus there. And he is there for us. And to offer us life that we cannot and don't have to earn. And it is power because it is the power of God revealed in glory in that terrible moment. It is where God's power broke us free from death and turned the world forever upside down, back the way it's supposed to be. It is power that spins galaxies and will light up neutron stars, that comes down and is there for us. Power that in the cross will even spring us out of the grave. It is when these things that we can carefully keep out there come uncomfortably close. Because it is in the cross that it is for us. And that's the one who is saying to us, take up your cross. As with all things when we read the Gospels, it matters so much who's speaking. And this is the one who has set his feet toward the cross. When he says to us, if any want to be my follower, my disciple, let them deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me, says the one on the way to Jerusalem. Deny themselves. In Jesus' day, that meant turning away from everything that tries to tell you who you are, all your identities. So family and work and what town you're from, what country you live in, what your political affiliation is, all of those things that want you to believe that they can tell you who you are, those come in a distant second. Jesus is the only one who gets to tell us who we are. We are Jesus' people, and everything else has to take that far back seat. Deny yourselves, even the things that we really like. Deny everything else that tries to tell you who you are. Take up your cross. Well, for Jesus' hearers, that was very specific. And it was terrible. It meant carrying that heavy crossbar, the one that goes across through town, so people could jeer at you and throw things at you and make fun of you as you were on your way to die. Now, we don't have crucifixion on our books in this country that I know of. But what this also means is taking on the public consequences of following Jesus. Because following Jesus leads us into those halls of power and speaks to people who have a vested interest in things staying the way they are. And also in ourselves that are pretty comfortable with that. And if we're following Jesus, there's probably going to be consequences. And follow me, Jesus says, the one who's on his way to Jerusalem. Follow Jesus wherever he's going. And based on past history, I'm pretty sure Jesus is going to be heading out to find and stand with the lost and the last and the least and the losers and the lepers. Follow him wherever he's going, says the man who has set his feet for Jerusalem. In a moment when these out there things come a little close to home, don't they? A little uncomfortably personal. But maybe they should. Maybe they should.